For some reason my streaming software decided to have a mare and disconnect everything, so I've just been reconnecting it all. Anyway, yes, the topic for today's broadcast is going to be a chapter from my ebook, which was called Simple Sevens. And every now and again I get an email from somebody who says, I liked your book, but I didn't get that chapter. So I thought I'd have a little look at that chapter. I've kind of talked about it in previous videos, but I just want to show you what it was actually about, what I was on about, and a few ways you can use that. Basically what the chapter kind of was trying to do is just to show you some very simple shapes that you can use, which kind of give you a set of little triangles which you can use as the kind of basis for building jazz chords, which you can use to back folk tunes with. And the idea was that using just the little triangles and then kind of finding positions where you could add your extra spare finger, you could very quickly move between all these nice jazzy sounding chord shapes and use them to chunk along with tunes. So I'll kind of be running you through some of those things today. Good morning to everybody who's saying good morning. It's the middle of the evening here, but good morning to you. Good morning to Jack. Good morning to Ed. Good evening to Yvonne. Who else have we got? I won't let me see any further back than that, but yes, hello to everybody. Thank you all for tuning in. Just going to grab my guitar actually, because I've left it over there. Won't be a minute. So yeah, the kind of starting point for this is, I'm assuming that everybody who's watching already knows that if you're in a major key, chords 1, 4 and 5 are always major, and 2, 3 and 6 are always minor, and then the 7th one is diminished, but we tend to avoid it by using the 5th chord in the first inversion. Hiya Keith, welcome aboard. So I've waffled about that endlessly in probably every single video that's on the channel, so I'm not going to cover it again. The first step beyond that into the realm of sort of more jazzy sounding chords is to use tetrads, which are chords with 4 notes in instead of triads, which are chords with 3. So in the standard kind of chords that we normally use, we're using things like G major, for example, which is just those 3 notes, G, B and D, and they're piled up on top of each other. And the logic behind triads is that the first note is your root note. That tells you what the chord is. So G chord has G at the bottom. The third note tells you whether the chord is major or minor, and so if you have a major third, it's a major chord, and if you flatten that third by a semitone, that turns it into a minor chord. And the fifth is basically filler. The fifth kind of pads the chord out. In physics terms, if you have a string that's vibrating, the first overtone that you can hear within the sound of that string vibrating is the fifth. Well, actually the first overtone is an octave, but then the next one after that is a fifth. So adding the fifth within a chord is effectively not really adding any sort of emotional content to the chord. It's just kind of beefing it up a bit by adding a sound which is already within the root note's sound, but you're just making it louder. So all the fifth does is fills out the space. So really your root is very important and your third is very important. Your fifth's kind of an extra padding note. Now, once you get bored of the sound of triads and you want to get a bit more jazzy, the next note that you start adding in is the 7th note of the scale. So if you've got a root, a third and a fifth, and then you add the 7th note from the major scale as well, so in the case of G, that is G, B, D, and then F sharp, which is the 7th. Da, 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 da. Then you get these really nice chords that have this kind of vague, floaty sort of feeling to them. That's a major 7 chord. That is the first type of tetrad, the major 7 chord. The second type of tetrad is what we would use for the 5th chord in a major key, chord 5. I'm going to come back to exactly why in a minute. If you want more detail on that, have a look at my video, the one which covers it's all the music theory for Celtic music part 2, I think, the one which covers why the chords go together. That kind of talks about this in more detail. And there's a blog linked from that which is the chord construction guide, which is on my website, and that kind of shows you properly how it all works. But yeah, the second kind of chord is called the dominant family. These are the chords that have names like D7, so just a letter and a number with no specification of major or minor. So with those chords, what you've got is the major triad as your bass, so notes 1, 3 and 5 from a major scale, and then the 7th note is added, but it's flattened by a semitone. When you add the flattened 7th, it makes the chord sound very unstable. So here's my root, 3rd, 5th, major 7th, and if I flatten that major 7th to that one, you get this. This kind of bluesy sounding chord, and that is a G7 chord that I'm playing there. If you're not a jazz player and you're a folk player, then there is one main place that you're going to use chords from this family, the seven chords, or the dominant chords as I often call them. They're going to be for chord 5 and chord 5 only to begin with in a major key. The other type of 7 chord is the minor 7 chord. So for the minor 7 chord, it's kind of like you're building chords using the Dorian mode. So you're taking notes 1, 3, 5 and 7 from what would be like the Dorian scale. So here's my G Dorian scale. And I'm going to take 1, 3, 5, 7, and then I'm going to pile them up together. And that gives me a G minor 7 chord. Now you'll notice with these, when I'm playing them, there's lots of different shapes in which I can play them. Like for example, G minor 7, just then I played it like that. I could also play it like this, or I could play it like this, or I could play it all the way up here, or I could play it like this. There's loads of ways. And the reason you can play them in lots of different shapes is that as long as you've got your root note at the lowest pitch in the chord, and you've got the right other notes present to give it its characteristic sound, it doesn't actually matter what order the other notes are piled in. But generally, as a principle, you'll have the most root notes within your chord, and then the most fifths, and then the most thirds, and then the most sevenths in that order. So usually, if you're trying to build a chord voicing, you'll have the root note at the lowest pitch, then maybe like 2 root notes in the chord, maybe 2 fifths, and probably 1 third and 1 seventh, or something like that, generally. I could talk more about the physics of why that is, because it's really interesting, but that's one for another day. One day I'll make a whole video about it once I work out how to animate all the little waves. But anyway, so yeah, the upshot of all that is then that there are 3 families of tetrads. Those are major 7 chords, minor 7 chords, and dominant 7 chords. On my mode wheel here, if we talk about an example in the key of G major, you can see as you go around the mode wheel, if I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, on the 5th chord it actually says major bracket dominant 7. That's what this bit's about. I don't know if that's coming out mirrored at your end or if that's just on my screen, but it says dominant 7 if you're reading it backwards, not Z mob. But yeah, anyway, so the chords, once you start adding these tetrads in, the chords that you can use for any major key are chords 1 and 4 are going to be major 7 chords. Chord 5 is going to be a 7 chord from the dominant family with the flattened 7th in it. And then the 3 minors, chord 2, chord 3 and chord 6, they're all going to be minor 7s. And the diminished chord, same as before, is going to be left out or avoided using an inverted chord 5. So yeah, that's that. If you wanted to use these shapes in any of the other modes, it works exactly the same as all the other chord picking videos that I've done before have said. So let's say you wanted to use, you wanted to play a tune in A Dorian. So that's related to G major, so you've got the same options. So A minor 7, B minor 7, C major 7. Chord 4 now is D7 from the dominant family, E minor 7, F sharp diminished, and well, actually, if you're in a minor key, you always make chord 7 a dominant as well. That's just a little extra thing. I'm not going to cover why, but yeah. So if you're in a minor key, chord 7's dominant, and whatever the dominant chord would have been anyway. So you get 2 dominant chords if you're in a minor key. Anyway, so that's the theory done. I promise there won't be, actually never say never, but there won't be much more theory in this video. But yeah, what I'm going to do now is just show you these little triangles, and then show you how you can use those in a few different keys. I am missing an E string today, by the way. I snapped it and I'm working from home, so I haven't got any more up here. I need to go down the shop and collect some more. So, but that won't hopefully affect this too much. Just move that around a bit. Ooh. So yeah, so the first triangle that we're going to want, I'll show you all the ones that are related to the key of G major. And the first triangle is the major 7 triangle, like this. So what you've got in this shape is your middle finger on the 3rd fret of the bottom string, playing a G note. You've got your major 3rd under your index finger, which is that one. That's 2nd fret on the A string, that's a B note. And then you've got your ring finger on the 4th fret of the D string, and that's giving you your major 7th. So you've got root 3rd 7th. As I said before, the 5th is really just padding for your chord. So if you're short on fingers or strings and you need to leave a note out, first note to get rid of is the 5th, and that's why there's no 5th in this chord. So that's our major 7 triangle. If you have a think about the key of G major, and have a think about the open strings, the 2 open strings that I have on this guitar at the moment are G and B. So those are both in chord 1 of G major anyway. So I'm going to leave those in and they're going to sound very nice. And the top string would be E if I had it, which compared to G is the 6th note in a G major scale. So I can leave that in as well. It's just going to be an extra added jazzy note for my chord. Which chord extensions you add over these triangles, which extra notes, is not actually overly important so long as they are in the scale. So for example, G major, if I played like a G chord with an F in it, that would sound grim because there's an F sharp in G major, there shouldn't be an F. But as long as the extra notes are high pitched and they are from within the scale, then they'll sound fine. So I'm going to leave my top strings ringing, and that's going to give me this, which is a very nice jazzy chord in G. Now the good thing about this triangle is, not only can I move it anywhere on the bottom string, and it'll give me a major 7 chord of whatever note my middle finger is on, I can also move it anywhere starting from the A string, and it'll do the same thing for whatever note my middle finger is on. If you're using it with ones on the A string, you need to leave off the bottom string, but that'll give you chords like C major 7, D major 7, E major 7, all sorts of nice things like that. So it's a very handy shape. And the other really good thing about it is, because I've got this spare little finger here, I can put that in loads of different places, and that'll give me lots of different nice chords, which will all be basically G major with extra notes that make them sound more jazzier. So I could do G major 7 like that. I could do slightly dissonant but quite interesting G major 11. I could swap those round and do G major 7 with an extra fifth in it, which is lovely. What else can you do? You can use the little triangle and flatten your index finger so that you get a sort of extra jazzy G major 7. There's all sorts of things you can do with that spare finger, so it's a really handy shape for that. The next triangle after the major 7 one, the next shape you're going to need is a dominant 7 triangle. So as I said before, compared to the major 7, the dominant 7 just has the same notes, but the 7th one is flattened. So I'm going to take my ring finger, which is currently playing the major 7th of G, and I'm going to flatten that by a semitone, and that's going to give me a G7 triangle. With that shape then, if we are in the key of G, the dominant chord is going to be D, the 5th. So I'm going to take that shape and I'm going to start it with my middle finger on the 5th fret of the A string, because that is a D note. And there's a nice little D7 triangle. With this D7 triangle, if I've got a B and an E over the top of that, those are both acceptable because B is the 13th of D, which is the same thing as saying it's the 6th note in a D major scale, and E is the 9th. So if I left those two strings in, I'd be playing a D13 chord, something like that. But if I use my little finger, I can get all sorts of other nice ones as well. D7, for example, D9, lots of other options. So yeah, so that's that little triangle. The other little triangle that you're going to want, if I go back to G, here's my G major 7 that I was playing before. To make the minor 7 out of that, we've got the 3rd under my index finger, so I'm going to flatten that by a semitone, making it into a minor 3rd, and we've got the 7th under my ring finger, so I'm going to flatten that as well, because the minor 7 triad, the minor 7 tetrad rather, has a flattened 3rd and a flattened 7th, so like that. So this isosceles, is it? I think this isosceles potentially triangle is the minor 7 shape. So what I'm going to do now is, using just those shapes and moving between the bottom string and the A string for my root notes, I'm going to play a whole little tetrad chord scale for the key of G major. So G major 7, A minor 7, I could play B minor 7 there, or I could play it there, because the index finger would be there, but that's fret 0, so the open string is doing it for me, so I don't have to fret it. Then C major, chord 4, so that's going to be C major 7, which is the first triangle that we looked at. And my root notes there under my middle finger. Chord 5 is D7 from the dominant family, so like that with the flattened 7th. And then chord 6 is going to be E minor, and there's an E on the 7th fret of the A string, so that's my chord 6, like that. Now this chord scale is really, really good for the key of G, because having a B and an E at the top of every chord in the key of G major is going to sound really nice. So you can just run through these shapes really quickly because they're easy to play, and leave the top strings ringing, and it's going to sound cool. So that, again, sorry I haven't got an E string, you'll have to imagine the E note, but it would sound something like this. And then that's G major 7 again up the top. So yeah, that's basically what the Simple Sevens chapter was about. It was just trying to show you those little triangle shapes, and then encourage you to mess around with putting your little finger in extra places to use those as a really nice starting point for finding loads of interesting jazzy chords that you can use yourself in different contexts. Further to that, there is another set of jazzy shapes which do basically the same thing, but they sound better, and I use them a lot more often. So I'll run you through these ones as well while we're here talking about this. So let's look at these in the key of A major, which is my favourite key to use them. They do work in G major as well, but they work better in A major just because the open strings happen to be more harmonious with A than with G. So yeah, this is our major shape that we're going to use for these. The first shape can be played either like this or like this. Doesn't really matter which you do. I tend to plump for that one because I like to put my middle finger on the B string. But anyway, so what you've got is your index finger on the 5th fret of the bottom string. That's your A root note. If we're doing A major 7 as our first chord, then we've got an A open string there. So we've got 2 root notes beefing out the bottom end of this chord, which is gives it a really nice solid bass, which is why I like using this shape a lot in A major. If you're using this shape for any chord other than A, then the A root note is not going to sound harmonious. So what you want to do is flatten that index finger slightly so that it just kind of muffles the A string. After that, I've got my 2 furthest out fingers 3 and 4. They're on the 6th fret of the D and G strings, and then you have to really curl this middle finger round and then plop it down on the 5th fret of the B string up there. So it's kind of like, if you look at that, that's kind of like you've made an A minor chord with the wrong fingers and then slid it up so that it's on the 5th and 6th frets, and then you put your index finger on the 5th, and that's A major 7. For the sort of easy version of it though, you don't actually need this rude finger, and if you leave that B string ringing in it, it sounds really, really nice, and the same with the top E string if you've got one. So that's going to be our simple major shape, and then optional extras. All sorts of things you can do with that. The next shape, if we're in the key of A major, I'll show you on the mode wheel. Next shape we want would be B minor 7. And the way we're going to do that is like this. So index finger on the B note on the 7th fret of the bottom string. Miss out the A string and mute it slightly by flattening your index finger. Middle finger goes on the 7th of the D string, and ring finger goes on the 7th of the G string, and that gives you B minor 7 plus an E, so that's actually a B minor 11 chord. within that chord, just so you know what the notes in it are, your index finger's your root note, obviously. Your middle finger's doing the 7th. So if you compare that to the major shape that we had before, the 7th was there, and the ring finger was doing the 3rd. So the 3rd and the 7th are both flattened now, which gives us our minor shape with root, 7th flattened, and 3rd flattened. So that's our first two chords, A major 7, B minor 7, like that. For C sharp minor 7, which is the next chord in A major, we can squidge that up 2 frets. Another really nice chord, even with the open strings. Then we want D major 7. So either we can use that little triangle from the first set of triangles, so that the root is on the A string. Or if you want to play it all the way up here, you can use the major 7 shape that we used for A and just slid up. So now my index finger's on the 10th fret. That leads us on to the dominant shape. I'll show you the dominant shape on A, because playing it on E would take us all the way up here. And for most people whose guitars have the wood joining on there, you won't probably be able to play this unless you stretch around like a lunatic. So I'll show you A7. What you'd actually be doing is E7. But anyway, so that was A major 7, and that finger's got the 7th under it. So if I flatten that finger, that's going to give me the dominant shape A7. So yeah, that's that one. Billy. So yeah, the whole. If I just quickly play you through the whole of an A. Oh, I've missed out the 6th chord, haven't I? For the 6th chord, you can use your minor 7 shape down there, because it's F sharp minor 7 that we're looking for. So you could play it there on the 2nd fret. Or you could play the minor 7 shape that we looked at before, the little triangle, all the way up here on the 9th fret of the A string. With any chord whose root is on the A string, you always miss off the bottom string, unless said chord is based on E, because then the bottom string will sound nice in it. Anyway, so here's the A major chord scale with those shapes. We've got A major 7, B minor 7, C sharp minor 7, D major 7, jazzy, sexy E7, F sharp minor 7, and then miss out the diminished chord, and then you're back where you started. So yeah, that's the other shape which I like to use a lot for these nice jazzy tetrads. That is pretty much everything that I wanted to say about those. I hope that's cleared up what they're actually for. I'll just see if I can find the actual section from the book, just so you can see. It's got chord diagrams for them all in it as well. I'm sure most people that are watching live, I know you've probably already got the book, so you'll find them all in there. See where they are. Here we are, simple 7s. There they all are. Look, they're all there. They're all there. So that's the 3 little triangles that I showed you at the start. They're shown with the roots on the A string, and that is the dominant shape with the root on the bottom string that we used a minute ago. Yeah, so that's that. Just one little thing about this as well. On the following page, there's a really useful diagram which I remember when I was kind of learning about, when I first started looking at how chords are constructed and music theory and stuff, somebody kind of, in fact, I think, can't remember if it was my guitar teacher at the time or if I found it on the internet, but somebody made me a diagram like this, and it was basically the most useful thing for understanding music theory that I ever found. What this is showing you, this is showing you all the root notes, which are these sort of maroon coloured ones with ones on them, and then it's showing you relative to those where all the other degrees of the scale are or would be, so that you can use those to come up with novel chord shapes. So for example, when we had the first triangle, which was with our fingers here, here and here, that's the root, the major third in light green, and the lovely lilac coloured or magenta coloured major seventh. And then if you flatten that seventh, that's root, major third, flat seventh. But then looking at this diagram will tell you what notes you're adding using your spare finger. So over your base of, let's say, a major triangle, for example, if you added that note, you'd have added the fifth with your little finger. If you perhaps added, let's have a look, you could add that one and that would give you a major 9 chord because you've added the second, or whatever. So memorising the notes that you'll get by going across in a straight line from your root note, memorising that the root note is always doubled up if you go 2 across and 2 up, memorising that the fifth is 1 across and 2 up, remembering the difference between the 2 sevenths and where they are, and remembering the difference between the 2 thirds and where they can be, either there or there. Things like that are really, really useful for these kinds of chord construction things. And the other thing is, whatever you've got on the bottom string, you can always duplicate it on the top string because, of course, they're the same. They're both E strings. Power chord shape, yes, exactly. The power chord shape is mega handy because it shows you the root, the fifth, and the root again. So yeah, so it's always handy to know that you've got your ninth 2 frets up from your starting point on the top string. You can always add that into any chord and it'll just give it an extra jazzy twist. Ninths are a very safe thing to add to a chord with your spare fingers. Ninths always sound nice. 11ths, on the other hand, rarely sound nice. Sometimes in a minor chord they might sound nice. There is actually a complete list further on in this book of everywhere where they will or won't sound nice. But you're better off, to be honest, just playing about with it yourself and trusting your ears. But yeah, ninths are safe, 11ths not so much, 13ths usually safe. Anyway, that's pretty much everything I wanted to say about this. Does anybody have any questions about anything? Or are we all good? Oh, other thing, I say this all the time, but does anybody have any topics they'd particularly like me to talk about next week? Because I'm always open to ideas. Your book's nearly done, by the way, Ed. Sorry it's taken me ages. It's very nearly there. It's turned from a pamphlet into a War and Peace sequel, so it's quite dense, but lots and lots of unusual chord shapes in there. Cool. I think we'll sign off for today. Oh, actually, just one other thing that you can do with these triangles. I don't think I've ever mentioned altered dominant chords on this channel, ever. And they sound really technical, and then they're not really. Oh, actually, I've just thought of 2 things that I should probably quickly mention. So altered dominant chords first. With the dominant shapes, as well as adding things like the 9th and the 13th to a dominant shape, you can actually add any note to a dominant shape, and if it's not within the scale of that shape's root note, then you'll get what's called an altered dominant chord, so something like a flat 9 or a sharp 9, or a flat 13 or a sharp 13. Dominant chords are unstable because of the interval between the flattened 7th and the 5th, which is a flattened 5th interval, which is very unpleasant to the ear, and that's why they're unstable. It's not really important to know that, it's just important to know that they're unstable and they want to go down a 5th. So chord 5 wants to go back to chord 1, and that is true. Whenever you hear a dominant chord, you always want to hear the chord that's down a 5th after it. Altered dominants do exactly the same thing, but more so. So if you take your, let's go back to our example in the key of G major. If you take your little D triangle and then you put your little finger there, so that would be D9, and that there is D sharp 9, which a lot of people call the Hendrix chord, because Jimi Hendrix used it all the time for loads of stuff, like Purple Haze. Or whatever. But yeah, anyway, so this sharp 9 chord is going to be really nice if you resolve back to G afterwards. And that's a great chord 5 to chord 1 opportunity. So if you're doing a dominant chord, you can put your little finger literally anywhere, and so long as it's going to resolve down a 5th, it's guaranteed to sound good. Then you can, if you find one you like, you can check from that little diagram in the book what you've actually added and what chord that actually is, if you feel less inclined, or you can just remember what it sounds like and just use it because it sounds nice. Either's fine. So that's one thing. And the other thing I wanted to say about dominant chords quickly was the traditional place to use them, and this is where they get their name of dominant chords from, is for the 5th chord in a major key, or also the 5th chord in a minor key, actually, in classical and jazz and stuff like that. And you can do that in folk music as well. So if you're in Dorian, for example, chord 5 should be minor, but you can put a dominant chord there and it'll want to resolve back to chord 1. You can put an altered dominant chord there and it'll want to resolve back to chord 1 even more. So if I was playing in A minor, I could play my E7 sharp 9 chord, and that would resolve nicely back to A minor. And that works fine with folk tunes. It sounds, gives them a kind of different feel, but it sounds cool. That's another option for an altered dominant chord. Or I can't show you the others because I haven't got a top string, but you'll find lots of them anyway. Finally, anytime you're playing a chord progression in which you're going to follow up any chord with a chord whose root note is a 5th below it, so let's say you're playing in the key of G, you play, if you play an A minor chord and then you're going to go up to D and then come back to G, so something like that. If you change whichever chord is going to resolve a 5th to a 7, it'll sound cool. Gives it a kind of jazzy swing kind of feel. So instead of my A minor chord, because A to D is down a 5th, A, G, F, E, D, I'm going to put an A7 there instead. And then instead of D, because D to G is down a 5th as well, I'm going to put D7 on the D chord. So then we're going to get To Make You Feel My Love, in fact, by whoever that was originally by before Adele did it. But anyway, so yeah, anytime you're resolving down a fifth, have a think about the chord progression that you're playing. If any chord resolves down a fifth, try sticking a dominant or an altered dominant on it, using one of those little triangles and sticking your spare finger anywhere, literally anywhere. And that will give you some interesting and unusual chord options. Anyway, I've definitely finished what I wanted to say now. So if nobody's got any questions about any of that, then I'll sign off for this week. There's going to be a brand new tune play along coming out tomorrow. This week's one is a slip jig called the Butterfly, so that you've got something to practice the techniques in my latest video about slip jigs along with. I thought that might be useful. So that's going to be out tomorrow afternoon, Saturday at 12:30. If you're watching on the replay, that's probably already up. Go and check it out. It's on the Folk Friend channel. And if through some amazing thing you haven't already got a copy of my book, then you can get hold of it on Amazon in paperback like this, or you can buy it as an ebook, which is much cheaper and comes with the audio that goes with it as well. There's loads of chords diagrams and all the music theory you need to know, and strumming patterns and all sorts, lots of good stuff in there. So go and check it out. It's called Backing Guitar Techniques for Traditional Celtic Music, and you can find it at finaleguitar.co.uk/shop. You can also find my other books on there, the Folk Friend Practice Diary and the Amazing Mode Wheel, which tells you all the chords for any key and will help you kind of understand the music theory for all this stuff as well. So check all that out if you haven't done already. I'm sure everybody on here already has. But yeah, nice one. Thanks everybody. Thank you all very much for tuning in. I'll be back next Friday. If you've got any ideas for topics, just drop me an email, info@finaleguitar.co.uk, or leave a comment on one of my videos. I always check them, so yeah, let me know. Congratulations to Matt as well, if he's watching, our winner for the Folk Friend fingerstyle competition last week. Well played. Shout out to Jordan as well, and yeah, nice one. Thanks everybody. Oh, off to Brittany. Nice. Oh, that's cool. Oh, I'm well jealous. Yeah. Probably be a quiet one, but at least the weather's better there. Anyway, cheers everybody. I'll see you next week. Have a nice holiday, Yvonne. And Ed, I'll be in touch soon. Cheers. Won't let me end the stream.